We are making some transitions from our, to a new email platform. So thank you for your patience as we go through this. We did take a little bit of a break for that reason, because we want it to be as smooth as possible. And although we did have a little bit of a glitch this morning, we need to rebuild our email list. So if you have any friends or relatives or cousins twice removed, please do send them these notices, because we would really love to hear from you and connect you to our platform that we hope you hold as dearly as we do, in terms of being useful to your work. With that, we're just going to give you a little bit of a brief announcement about 2 webinars coming up in the new year. Open Door Group has done, you may know, tremendous work around social inclusion in particular, and they have agreed to do a presentation for us on January 26th. So we will work on that and get more details out to you when we have them. And then we will do a topic around leadership, and one of the presenters will be Anthony Neptune, and that will happen on February 23rd. So as we were just thinking about developing new sessions, it became pretty apparent that we probably could really benefit from hearing from some of our skilled leaders in the community. And you'll hear today as well that one of our new competencies with the revision is around leadership. So we just felt we wanted to respond to that in a very practical way. So enough from Regina. I am just going to turn this presentation over to Vicky Heuhn, who you've heard.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. It's actually this afternoon in beautiful, snowy Kingston, where I'm hanging out. And I recognize a bunch of our members. Heather, now my list has disappeared, but I saw Heather and Carmen and a whole bunch of other folks who, James, Dawn, I saw, who are joining in with us today, and it's really nice to have you here too. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about PSR. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I think most of you are aware of it, and then talk more about the competencies. And then in terms of the competencies of practice we have and how you use them in order to obtain your CPRRP. And then John will get into to more of the actual competencies themselves. So once I figure out which button to push, I got it. So here we are. Our tagline is, surprise, surprise, your partner in recovery. So for those of you who aren't aware of this, we are a national organization. We have, we're not a single sector. Obviously, PSR crosses many sectors, and our board is representative of those many various sectors. So we have psychologists, we have psychiatrists, we have social workers, we have people with lived experience, we have family members, administrators, just a whole range of folks. We're all very dedicated volunteers, I might add, and we offer both individual and organizational memberships. Someone said to me a little while ago, who didn't really understand where they came from, said, so why do you guys think you could do this competencies, develop this? Where did you come from? So I reminded them of an organization called the International Association of Psychosocial Rehabilitation. My thought was that you, if you could say it, you could belong to it. And it was really a collaborative group of folks from both the States, some international, and as well as Canada, who really focused in on PSR things. So you think of people like James Beard, Jerry Dinson, Marianne Farkas. I mean, I could go on, but these folks that really started it off and in terms of the PSR movement. So in about 2002, it was pretty clear that the folks in the States were having to deal with managed care, and their interests were becoming more divergent from ours as Canadians. So we decided that we'd have a very friendly separation, which it was. And that's how PSR RPS Canada became. We knew that we would be focusing mostly on education. We didn't have to deal with the politics that they have in the States. We were very, very fortunate. So what are we doing now? Well, we really have been working in the last 15 years to really build our organization and make sure we had a leadership role throughout Canada around mental health and to some degree addiction. So we've been a member of the Canadian Alliance of Mental Illness and Mental Health, and we've had really active roles there. Those of you who may not have heard of it, it's a national organization of national organizations. So you have to be a national organization to belong. There's about 18, 19 of us. If you've ever heard of the FACES campaign or things like that, this is the group that really drives it. So it's really key that we sit at that table, and we have and been very active in it. We've been working a lot with Mental Health Commission. You can see in their guideline papers, they actually acknowledge us right at the very beginning. We really wanted to make sure that our membership was affordable and that we could maximize our benefits. So we got information online. You can go ahead and have a look at it later. It's on our website about our strategic plan and how we're really moving ahead on an education plan and an online library. So what do? Well, this is stuff that you guys are quite aware of, so I'm not going to read it off, but you know, we really are based on the principles of respect, dignity, hope, and we recognize that the essence of it is that the evidence that's been done for many decades really use PSR in terms of showing how to move people ahead with, or to walk with them as they move ahead on their recovery journey. When we got into the competencies, we said, you know, we sort of sat around, and this started back in 2010, and we really said, okay, we've been building up, we got to know each other, we're across Canada. So if we want to build a certification program for Canadians, we really have to identify what are the competencies for practice. And many of us were familiar with the CPRP out of the States and had used it, but some of us were very frustrated with the diversity in terms of not aligning with our Canadian principles, our Canadian diversity, some of our aspects of our Canadian culture. And we also knew that they had actually created their certification program without a competencies of practice. So we decided no, that wasn't the way we were going to do it. We were going to take the time. So we took 3 years, a lot of volunteer time. It was all volunteer time, I might add. Getting the funds even together to get people together a couple of times. Got that from some organizations that donated money, so on and so forth. And we finally, we had researchers involved, and we finally came out with our first edition in 2013. We had also made a commitment that we would continue to renew and review that. So in September 2017, just this year, John launched the second, well, we all launched, but John introduced it at our Halifax convention, national convention. So people have said, well, you know, who really needs to do this? Well, it is a volunteer thing, obviously, but really anyone who can do it, who is involved with people on their recovery journey, and anyone who is on their own recovery journey, is often involved with helping others, can also do it. What we are striving with this is to have a certification that really allows people to say, I am proficient in providing recovery-oriented practices. And it's not just me that's saying it. And my proficiency is based on evidence. What we are finding, what I'm finding, another role I have is I'm a surveyor for Accreditation Canada. And I often find myself going into institutions who say, oh yes, we're doing recovery, but they have no idea what that means. My famous example is one time when I went into a hospital and they were having a recovery picnic. Please join us at our recovery picnic. I'm not sure what the picnic was recovering from, but it was a little odd. So we're finding that the people really didn't understand what recovery was. They could say they were doing it, but they really didn't understand what it was. So we decided with this credential, It's all based on evidence. It's based on the competencies, as well as we use the Mental Health Commission guidelines, and that's all based on evidence. So there are at this point there are several ways of being eligible for the program. The first one is under phase 1. Folks can come in who have their CPRP as long as it's no older than a year. If it's older than a year, then you have to go under phase 2. But anyone who has currently got the certification, you are automatically grandfathered in. We're recognizing that the CPRP is valid to acknowledge your proficiency here in Canada. It's interesting, though, I had a friend who did, actually several friends who have taken that grandfathering, and then they had a colleague who went through phase 2, and they said, you know, we really missed something, because our colleague who went through phase 2 went through the competencies, is very familiar with them, and we're not. And so I said, well, you know, you could still have a good look at them and maybe have a conversation. Phase 2 then is a combination of experience and education, and there are several pathways under phase 2. There's the PhD, the BA, 10 years experience, recognizing that there have been people in the field for decades who may not have that education but certainly have the experience. And we're certainly, and we're currently working under pathway 4, which will be for people who have lived experience. We want to be able to open it to as many people as possible, but also to ensure that the certification is credible, and it also is acknowledges the expertise that people with lived experience bring. And this might be a first, we believe, in Canada, so we certainly are working on that with great excitement. So how does it work? Well, first of all, someone who has their CPRP must hold a membership in PSR RPS Canada. And as you can see at the top of this slide, it says Certified Psychosocial Rehabilitation and Recovery Practitioner. I shortened it down to Certified PSR and Recovery Practitioner just because it gets so long. And you will notice that it's different from the States. They are a Certified Psychiatric Rehabilitation Practitioner. The difference, of course, is that they have managed care, so they have to use that word. Okay, so you have to be a member. We have broken down the costs of purchasing a CPRP into 2 phases. Other places who have national certifications, they charge everything up front, and then if you're not successful, you lose all your money. Well, we're saying no. We're going to have the application cost is up front for $250, and then later on, after you have successfully completed your paper, then you buy your maintenance of certification. And just to let you know, no one at this point has failed, including me. I wrote my paper and I passed. So it's a 12 to 1500 word paper. This is not terribly onerous. What we are really looking for is to ensure that people understand the competencies. And we use both ours and the recovery guidelines. And we really say, you know, look at recent research. We are based on evidence. We know what we're talking about. We have available information about how to write the paper. We provide information on how it's marked. It's done anonymously, so on and so forth. We are now working on a communications plan to make sure that organizations recognize the value of having people with CPRRPs in their organization. We have a number of organizational members who certainly acknowledge that and understand it and support their staff to obtain this certification. I know I sure did when I was a CEO. I mean, it was a great benefit I could offer staff and also encourage them to keep on their education. So in the organizational memberships, really anybody associated with the organization is covered by that membership. So those people do not have to buy a separate membership. they are covered. Now, there are different degrees of organizational memberships, anywhere from unlimited, people can apply, to 10 or 20, but you know, it works out. And it also is a great way that we tell our organizations that you can support people's lived experience to get more education and to prove their competence in what they do. So where are we going next? Well, it's a really exciting time for us. Jen is working with us, and of course Regina's tied at the hip into this in all sorts of places, and John as well. We're really excited that we're going to start building an online library of webinars and other things that people can access when they want to get current information, or well, hopefully current information, but webinars that have happened. We're hoping that we could get our members to participate, to show their evidence-based practices. We are about to send out a letter to our organizations and to all members saying, hey, we've got the competencies of practice for individuals down. Now we want to work on the ones for organizations. And decades ago, a few of us got together and did something. Those desperately need updating. We want to be the ones to do that. We're also looking at regional and local training events, making recovery real in your practice. I mean, you can talk about the competencies, but if you can't relate what that means to you, Ginger, your organization does have a membership, I think. I'll check. You have to. We have to make sure people understand making it real, taking those competencies and putting them right into their everyday practice. So I think of when I walk into an acute care facility and I'm talking about recovery, and the nurses there are saying, hey, we're in acute care. We can't possibly talk to people about recovery and hope. I said, why not? Well, because they're so ill. Okay, so how do we treat them? And we talk about that. And, you know, we talk about dignity and respect. And I say to them, well, you know, how do you give out your meds? Well, we have everybody line up at a little window. And I said, and how does that give them hope? And then they pause, because for everything we do, no matter whether it's an acute, tertiary, community, wherever it is, if I have an illness, it doesn't matter where I am, I should be treated with respect, dignity, and I should be allowed to have somebody help me, walk with me on my hope and journey. So that's it for me. I regretfully have to leave this in about 45 minutes, so I hope to be around to answer any questions. But you've got all my information. Please, please do not hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or want clarification on anything I've talked about.
Thank you very much, Vicky. If
Thanks so much,
has
Regina.
Any questions, maybe you just want to type them into the type box. And Vicky, I know that you're really good at just tracking that. So thankfully we have you for another 45 minutes or so, but just in case anybody has any pressing questions, they can make sure that they can get those answered as soon as possible. So thanks for a wonderful and robust presentation, Vicky. That was really neat bird's eye overview of what's going on. And now we're on to Dr. Higenbottam. Just welcome to you, John, and over to you. No problem, I can do that. You can just say next slide. Oh, you got it, John. You got it.
Thank you. And I'm having problems getting the slide to advance. Oh, just a second. So, just the real question is why do we have PSR competencies of practice? And really, what's really important about these PSR competencies of practices is they all reflect practices which are essential tools which should be available to people in recovery. And really, this is a major mission of PSR Canada, as well as the Advanced Practice PSR, is really to try to create better understanding at the field level, at the senior management level, at the leadership level, policy making level, of the importance of these PSR practices, because they are practices which are demonstrated to be highly effective and should be available to all people in recovery. And if we're really going to transform mental health services in Canada, we really need to somehow have a strategy to make these practices available to all the people who are in recovery. So acquiring competence in providing these practices is important not only for us as individual practitioners, but it's also important for that national strategy, developing a workforce of practitioners who can really lead the transformation to evidence-based recovery-oriented practices. If you don't have that workforce, you can't make the transformation in this country. So the successful implementation of our national mental health strategy, which moves to effective recovery-oriented mental health practices, requires the development of this workforce of skilled recovery-oriented practitioners. And that means all of us and all of our colleagues. How were the competencies developed? In 2011, there was a working group of the board, which was created by the PSR Canada Board of Directors, people from across Canada, and we conducted an extensive literature reviews, consultations, talked to people in the field, and developed the initial core competencies, which were grouped into the following 5 broad categories: culture and diversity, professional skills, psychosocial rehab practices, supporting services, knowledge of PSR and recovery-oriented services, and relational skills. The working group developed a number of skills and performance indicators for within each of these 5 broad competency categories. And we felt it was very important that you have actual performance indicators attached to the skills, knowledge, and attitudes, so that you can actually determine when people actually have acquired the skills. So these performance indicators were specific behavioral descriptions of the skills, knowledge, attitudes necessary in order to achieve and demonstrate competencies. And we published this, as was mentioned earlier, as the first edition of Competencies of Practice in 2011. And then in 2017, this year, the board of PSR Canada requested a review and revision of the first edition. So myself, Regina.
So John, it's just Regina. Is it possible?
So the purpose of the Competencies of Practice and the Competencies of Practice are national standards for the assessment of competence needed for recovery-oriented practice. So these are intended to be national standards. A national standardized set of competencies for psychosocial rehab practitioners in Canada to demonstrate their continued competence to practice. A resource that serves as a foundation in the development or enhancement of education and training curricula, professional development activities, recruitment practices, performance evaluation, and strategic workforce planning. What that means is that these are competencies which should be the foundation for actually the education and training of practitioners. And there needs to be quite a significant change in the curricula, the way that people are educated and trained to work in the mental health field. And it's unfortunate that at the present time, many of the training and education programs for practitioners, and I'm talking about psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, psychiatric nurses, you name it. If you take a look at the curricula, they contain little or nothing in terms of PSR approaches and recovery-oriented approaches. And that's really unfortunate, because these approaches have the evidence base to demonstrate that they are the most effective approaches for people with mental illness, and should be made available to anyone who is in recovery. So they've got a lot of significance in terms of education and training curriculum. The PSR competencies are the specific knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed to provide effective evidence-based recovery-oriented practices. And again, this is again the punchline here. because of their demonstrated effectiveness, these PSR practices are essential tools. So looking at the practice domains, this is where we made some changes from the 2013 competencies. So we now have an additional domain. We have diversity and inclusion. We have professional skills, psychosocial rehabilitation practices, with supporting and recovery-oriented services. Domain D consists of skills in the area of equity and social participation. And domain E is a new one, which we thought was important to include, which is really reflects back to what I just said, which is facilitating change and providing leadership. If we're really going to change the way mental health services are provided to effective recovery-oriented services in this country, we have to expect all of our workforce, all the practitioners, you, me, everybody who's out there working in the field, to actually become change agents ourselves. We have to provide the leadership and facilitate the change that needs to happen. And that has to happen at all levels of the system. So looking at the first domain then, this is the diversity and inclusion domain. Probably the major differences in this domain is the fact that we tried to change some of the language, which was a bit confusing in the previous standards. And so the emphasis here was really coming up with clear, more understandable language of the skills. So the A1 was demonstrating the awareness of one's own cultural values and biases. And sorry for the noise in the background. I'm at Vancouver Hospital. I think they're doing a medevac or something here right now. And then the specific skills under this are self-reflects on, has an awareness of own values and biases with respect to culture, is able to recognize the limits of one's own competence in working with people from diverse cultures, and is aware of biases and their effects on individuals. So this really, this standard really focuses on one's understanding of one's own cultural values and biases, and that awareness, of course, is important in terms of being able to provide effective, culturally sensitive services to people. A2 demonstrates awareness of individuals' values, beliefs, experience, and preference. And this gets more into the importance of learning from individuals about their culture, value, needs, and preferences, wishes, and ensure that these are this understanding is reflected in the way you provide services to people. And related closer to that, of course, is respect for the rights of individuals to their customs, beliefs, and practices. And, by the way, if you're wondering if I'm going to be plotting through every single competency in all of the domains, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to give you a bit of the flavor for the competencies in each of the domains, and particularly focus on the new ones this time. So A3 then in domain A, which the diversity and inclusion domain, is demonstrates knowledge of culture and diversity. So this builds on the earlier two competencies and gets into more into the basic knowledge and understanding of the concept of cultural competence and its application across a wide variety of cultural groups, specific knowledge and understanding of diversity regarding people being served with strengths, challenges, and or interconnected health and social issues impacting them. So really gets into the whole into the importance of having really a good working knowledge of cultures, diversity of people that you're working with. Understands the need to avoid overgeneralization and negative stereotyping, because stereotyping is what we're trying to diminish and avoid in any way in our providing services to people. understands how multiple identities such as race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, social class, and immigration shape an individual's life experience. So you can see all of these competence areas really are quite integrated around cultural diversity and how we can be inclusive in providing services to people. Cultural safety gets into the particular set of skills, attitudes, and knowledge which is important for working with Indigenous people. Indigenous people have preferred the term cultural safety, and so this particular competence area focuses on that. Understands and applies cultural safety principles, personal knowledge, cultural protocols, process, partnership, positive purpose, and has the ability to discuss racial, ethnic, cultural issues, has respect for the unique histories, cultures, language, and social circumstances manifest in different cultures. Again, the focus here is on Indigenous people. The term cultural safety is a term that Indigenous people prefer in terms of types of services should be receiving. Again, cultural safety, practical skills, cultural differences, power dynamics that affect the cross-cultural interaction, and 4.5 will certainly resonate with people. Understands colonization and post-colonial processes and the impact on the lives of Indigenous people. Okay, I'm skipping domain B. So domain C is the one where the major changes have occurred, and C1 gets into a statement on understanding mental illness and its impact on individuals. I think one of the things that bothered some of us, particularly me, I guess, when I looked at the 2013 competencies that we put out was that we're all well and good, but there was wasn't enough emphasis really in terms of what are the actual practices which we should be implementing and providing. How are these competencies actually going to change the way we do things? How are they going to change our own practice? And so we felt, and particularly I felt very strongly that we really needed to beef this section up considerably and become very, very specific in terms of the knowledge areas that are important for people. And we've also included some areas that people might question, so I'm going to say a bit about those. The first one, C1, understands mental illness and its impact on individuals. We felt very strongly that since some of the people who go through our programs like the Douglas program and so on may have had little or no background in mental illness, we felt that it was really important that they have some background, they have some general understanding of mental illness and its impact on individuals. And so some of these competency areas refer to some general understanding of mental illness and related issues. So the first one, C1, you can see understands the needs of people with mental illness, including complex cognitive, behavioral, substance use, misuse, and physical challenges, who are best served by PSR services. Demonstrates an understanding of the signs and symptoms of mental illnesses and their impacts on daily functioning. It might be wonderful to have a good understanding of recovery, but if you don't really understand what mental illness is and its signs and symptoms, how it affects people, then we thought that this was a real problem. C1.3 has a basic knowledge of diagnostic systems such as DSM-5. Whether you like it or not, if you're working in the system these days, in many settings, you're going to be expected to have some basic knowledge of these things like DSM-5. None of us really love DSM-5, but hey, it's out there, and it's really important for practitioners to have some basic knowledge of it, so you can at least hold your own at a case conference. So we've included that. In similar vein, basic knowledge of psychiatric medications, including therapeutic purposes, adverse events, and risks and reasons for discontinuation. Again, among the best practices, the majority of the evidence-based best practices in mental health, particularly community mental health, are PSR practices. But additionally, there are best practices in the use of psychiatric medications. And we feel strongly that that people who are providing recovery-oriented approaches need to understand something about the medications that people are on, and adverse events and risks, reasons why people tend to discontinue, and so on. Also, understanding the effects of stigma and discrimination. That goes back to some of what we looked at in Domain A, and assesses the effects of biological, psychological, spiritual, and environmental factors on mental health. So we're talking about biopsychosocial, spiritual approach here. And then we get into the specifics of evidence-based or evidence-informed PSR practices as essential tools for recovery. So we feel that practitioners who are practicing or aspire to practice recovery-oriented evidence-based approaches need to know, need to know the basics in these areas. In fact, we went a little further than that. So these performance indicators here include not just demonstrating the knowledge, but can you actually implement these things? If somebody sent you off to develop and implement an ACT team in your community, would you know how to do that, or at least would you know where to go to find out how to do it, know what significant literature was, and so on, or who you should be talking to? So C4.1 actually applies to ACT teams to serve community treatment practices. Next, 4.2, supported employment practices, supported education practices, and supported housing practices. These are all the key evidence-based practices. These are the ones where there is scads of evidence to show their effectiveness, and they are essential tools for recovery. Everybody who's in recovery who requires these services should have access to them. Moving on, understands and can implement evidence-based and evidence-informed PSR practices as essential tools for recovery. Demonstrates knowledge of and can implement wellness practices. So this gets into the rather large area on wellness, which includes illness management and recovery and relapse prevention. So this is a very important area of PSR, and there's substantial evidence that that there are approaches which can help people manage their illness and most importantly prevent relapse. And this should be part of any recovery plan. Health education. This gets into the health problems which are associated with mental illness, problematic substance use, healthy eating, active living, smoking cessation, weight management. These are all really important wellness practices. And then we get into other areas which also have evidence supporting them. This includes leisure services, clubhouse services, and notice it says here accredited clubhouse services, so ones which really conform to the clubhouse model and can implement peer support services. And again, there's emerging literature now in terms of the importance of peer support services and fidelity to the peer support model. There are a number of major recovery enhancing interventions and approaches which are also evidence-based and should be available to people in recovery. And so we've included these as well. Knowledge of cognitive behavioral therapies, including mindfulness, and, which is more of a meditation approach, but
these days you hear a lot of references to mindfulness and workshops on mindfulness and so on. But actually the more substantial literature courses in the area, more general area of cognitive behavioral therapies. It's really important that practitioners really understand the importance and the application, the ability to provide cognitive behavior therapies. Skill building, skill programming, providing our individuals in recovery with the skills that they're required to be able to function effectively in the community. Integrated treatment for concurrent disorders. This, of course, is a huge issue these days because many of our clients have concurrent disorders. If we go to places like the downtown east side in Vancouver, probably over 70% of people require integrated treatment for concurrent disorders. And yet, when you look at the kind of services which are being developed these days, it seems to be largely harm reduction services. And you don't hear too much about rehab or integrated treatment for concurrent disorders, which really underscores the need for us to be out there and pushing for effective evidence-based integrated treatment services for people. Cognitive remediation. In BC, we just recently did a workshop, one-day workshop on cognitive remediation. This is actually came out of the brain injury world. Cognitive remediation is a set of computer-based exercises for the restoration or improvement of cognitive skills which have been damaged by case of brain injury, obviously by brain injury, but are also associated with people with serious mental illness, particularly psychosis. And there is a substantial emerging literature right now on the importance of cognitive remediation. So this is something else we feel should be available to people in recovery. And moving right along, many of these skills, motivational interviewing, particularly used in the addictions world, interventions for trauma-informed practices, knowledge of medication and illness management. This goes back to the issues we discussed a bit earlier of the importance of taking medications, particularly the medications in connection with psychosocial approaches. Finally, the early psychosis interventions. This gets into the early psychosis literature, which is also emerging literature of practices which should be available to people, particularly young people who are showing evidence of development of psychosis. Okay, so finally, I'd be happy to hear the last domain is on facilitating change and providing leadership. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, this is the new one, and we're looking at promoting the application of recovery or PSR in practice. So how do we actually facilitate change and provide leadership in transforming our services wherever we work and hopefully throughout the province and throughout the country? Well, this requires a shared vision and engaging others in the change process to effectively apply recovery principles and competencies. It's okay for us to have a vision and to be changing our practice, but we have to bring everybody else into it as well. It also means engaging people with lived experience in all aspects of mental health service delivery. And just if I can just comment on that just quickly, what has really made the change in the United States, at least in some of the states, has been the fact that they've had a very deliberate strategy in the United States of targeting all of the stakeholders in the mental health service system. So when, in terms of evidence-based practices and creating an understanding of evidence-based practices, this is being aimed at practitioners, being aimed at family members, it's being aimed at people, service users, people with lived experience. It's being aimed at policymakers, decision makers, administrators, you name it. All of the stakeholders in the system are targets in terms of strategy to really create a shared vision and understanding the importance of adopting evidence-based recovery-oriented services. It's been very effective in some states where they implement strategy, like New York, and Connecticut, and so on. It's the sort of thing we desperately need in this country, in provinces, territories, and health authorities. We need to create that shared vision and understanding. Really, this is in the best interest of certainly not just our clients and families, but it's in the best interest as well of policymakers and decision makers. Because if you really want to develop an effective community-based service system which keeps people out of the emergency rooms in provinces, then you need to have adopt these practices. And so the decision makers, the policy makers, the people in the Ministry of Health, and so on, really have to understand the importance of adopting these practices. Otherwise, continue to see a system where we don't do a good job of supporting people in the community. So, just to summarize then, the competencies in recovery-oriented practice, these competencies are important because they reflect a uniquely Canadian perspective. Vicky mentioned that before, the fact that I had a divorce from the American organization back in 2002 and frustrated with their competencies. And these are uniquely Canadian. And they also resonate with the Mental Health Commission of Canada recovery guidelines and help to make those guidelines actionable. One of the other things we've been working on recently at a conference in Toronto in the fall is actually meeting with the Mental Health Commission, talking to them, actually educating them so that they have the understanding that if they really want to implement their national strategy, they really need to be working with us and really promoting effective evidence-based approaches. So they are also a guide to developing and providing high fidelity evidence-based services, for example. So if you're a member of an ACT team, what do you have to do to practice recovery, or if you're in an acute care setting or working in a clubhouse or whatever, this is a guide to you to develop these services. And you can turn that around also and use it as a framework for assessing the degree to which the services are recovery oriented. They're national, they're standardized. We hope that someday the light will come on and the Accreditation Commission, Accreditation Canada will figure out that they need to bring these out as.
So thank you, John. That's a lot of material. We understand for people who are at home or in their office listening, and we understand also this is really just a bit of a drive-by to give you a overarching systematic way to begin to think about it. We hope that as we go through the competencies and just itemize them a little bit, that it gives you inspiration and a sense of desire to become certified. The competencies really, you're going to be successful as you take some of those competencies and you tell us a story perhaps about how you implement those competencies. Either a real or an imaginary story is fine, but just to be able to support your ideas of applying those competencies with some good evidence behind why you're doing what you're doing. So I really also picked up just with John just this whole focus on being change agents within organizations, and for those of us who are in direct service, or for those of us who are in administration or educational roles, that we truly all have a responsibility to be able to make these changes to support recovery and support our systems to be more recovery oriented. I hope that you heard lots about collaboration and shared decision making, which I'm sure that is a big element of your practice. But I guess historically that was not always how services were delivered. But hopefully you'll have seen that really as we are competent practitioners, that we're embracing those collaborative practices, not only because we're nice people, but because we're aware of the evidence that that actually helps people enact the change that they want to enact. So by being more invested and articulate about the changes people want to see and are supporting those changes, that really helps people move forward in their recovery. John also just mentioned mindfulness, so please, we are hoping to have some substantial education around mindfulness next year. And he did also mention just the CBT. And please stay tuned, because I think you'll see lots of resources coming on cognitive behavioral therapy in the near future, because it sounds like our ministry, our BC ministry, are at least interested in trying to move that work forward. And I guess big thanks to BC Schizophrenia Society and Susan Inman and Mr. Randall's name, just his first name escapes me at the moment, but just really great work on behalf of that committee to advance that work in British Columbia around cognitive remediation and rehabilitation. So with that in mind, you know that the text is open for you. I'm just going to start my webcam so you will see who I am. I'm here sitting with Susan, and Susan just slinked off in a corner there. Is it all right? Okay. Anyway, so if you have questions, please do let us know. If you have comments, do let us know, because you just got Vicky and John, some great experts in the room, who are here to answer your questions if you have any. So I'll just keep rambling, because I know sometimes it takes a wee moment to formulate those ideas. We will send you a link to the evaluation, our system. We're just changing it up a little bit, but put it in and it goes directly back to Douglas College. You may need a little bit of time to get certificates, so let us know if you're interested in having a certificate. We just might have to build that a little bit. So with that in mind, just seeing if there's Daniel's typing. Thank you, Daniel. So you may have a question or a comment. So I just see that people are typing. Just wait for a moment. I see that Michael is on the line as well. Michael, you do have a microphone, so I'm not sure if you have anything that you'd like to add, just because you were a key member of the competencies and making those changes. So feel free if you want to say anything, Michael. Yeah, you can just unmute yourself, Michael, if you want to say something. I think you're typing, Michael. That's good too. Michael says, thanks for the invite. I will stay quiet for the time being. No worries, Michael. Thanks. Thanks as always. I'm just trying to scroll up here. Oops. All right. I would like to thank everyone taking the time to share this information, Daniel says. I'm pleased that there's now something Canadian that embraces those of us with mental health issues. How nice. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. I appreciate it. We're trying to work, I have worked through CPR, and I think it may be a better choice. That's awesome. Great. You have a new project for 2018. That's great. Yeah, so Michael says that he's happy to answer any questions if anybody on the line has any. Maybe not. I'll just leave that open for another minute or so, and maybe if not, then we'll just close down. Thank you again for being with us this morning. We look forward to 2018 with some great new information. Starting off with Open Door Group. And then we have some great speakers lined up around the leadership piece as well. And we'll just, once we have all those details together, of course, we'll publish that and we'll let you know. Yeah. See Michael is typing, so I'll just see if there are any final comments. And Alana's typing a little something too. Thank you, Alana. Michael says, good to see the new Canadian competency. It's a living document and we'll need everyone to help and update as time goes by. That's a good point, Michael. It is a dynamic living thing, and we are in this large country where recovery has been, I guess, interpreted and rolled out in different ways, and so we're learning as we're going, and we're accumulating evidence, which is really important. I think something, too, that we could consider in future maybe additions would be really thinking about knowledge translation and just being mindful about how we make those changes and what strategies seem to make a difference. Just thinking about, what structures can we put in place to support the implementation of best practices and new learning. It might be something we might want to think about as time goes by. Alana says, I'm curious as to the timeline for persons with personal experience working in the field and the application process. So, Vicky, you may still be with us. Let me just double check. Vicky might be a good person to answer that. So I'm just going to give her a little moment to unmute. Go ahead, Vicky.
Hi. In terms of the timeline, first of all, the application process is exactly the same for people with lived experience as it is with anyone else. So there are 4 pathways, and it's just a matter of which portal you come through. So at this point, the pathway 4 that we're calling it is we're putting together and determining with a group of peers the appropriate experience in the field and so on and so forth that a person with a lived experience should have, so that it's just as credible as any of the other pathways. We want to make sure that people get recognized well for their competencies. So so it wouldn't be any different once someone has completed the portal application, which identifies their experience and so on and so forth. They would just go ahead and do what everybody else does, write the paper, and in terms of that timeline, I think it's something like people have got six months to do it, but quite frankly, it's only 12 to 1,500 words. I sat down on a weekend and just went through it, and I actually used something that I had done in my practice and related the evidence to it, and boom, she was done.
Vicky, that's a great summary. Thank you very much. I think one of the reasons I'm really proud to be part of this organization too is that we really support people with lived experience having access, and it's very much a strong value that I appreciate very much from this organization. You'll see in the background that we have a little joy, and maybe that is how we'll end the session, by just wishing you lots of joy and happiness over the holiday, however you may wish to celebrate that. Hopefully you'll be able to take a little time for yourself and recharge your own batteries, and maybe go for a little walk with a dog, or have some mindfulness, or whatever it is that makes you feel fresh and strong and well. So we thank you for your continued support. Thanks, Michael, for posting additional detail from PSR Canada. Appreciate that. Thanks to you all. Alana says, thank you very much for taking the time. I thought it was still waiting for approval. Great conference. Very happy to be able to join, and happy to have you, Alana. Really great. So with that, from the team and myself, from Manny, from Jen, from Susan who's in the room, from John, from Vicky, again, happy holidays to you, and we look forward to seeing you back in January.